even a private mailbox, if you prefer. I nodded. That's what I want. Privacy, simplicity, security. Understood, he said, already typing. May I ask what your plans are for the funds, retirement relocation investment? I plan to live quietly, I said, and make sure no one can touch what isn't theirs. That answer seemed to satisfy him. We completed the paperwork. He walked me through the process to transfer the full $890,000 minus closing fees into my new account. By Wednesday, the money would clear. It'll be safe, Craig assured me, and accessible to no one but you. That's exactly what I need. That afternoon, I stopped by a small electronics store tucked beside a coffee shop downtown. The kind of place that sold more radio parts than smartphones. I liked it immediately. I'm looking for a hidden camera, I told the man behind the counter. Small, discreet, motion activated. He nodded like this wasn't the first time someone had walked in with that request. Streaming or just recording? Streaming, I said. And I need to control it from my phone. He showed me a device shaped like a standard wall charger. Wi-Fi enabled 12-hour battery motion alerts. People usually stick these in entryways or living rooms. Looks like it belongs. That'll do, I said, paying in cash. Back at the apartment, I tested it on the coffee table. The app synced easily. The video feed was clear enough to read the fine print on a cereal box from across the room. I turned it off and stared at the device in my hand. It wasn't for revenge. It was for proof. The last step was the letter. I took out a sheet of heavyweight paper, the kind Margaret had used for thank you notes, and began writing in the slow, deliberate penmanship she'd always loved. Emily and Scott. If you're reading this, it means you came back expecting one version of your future and found another. Yes, I heard your conversation. The one where you called me a burden. The one where you planned to sell my house while I was still alive to help fund your dream home. You forgot who raised you, who paid your tuition, who worked double shifts and gave up retirement plans so you could have a head start. You forgot that this house wasn't just a building. It was your mother's legacy, my life's work. But I didn't forget. I've sold the house. I've secured the funds. I've moved on, not out of anger, but clarity. You have 30 days to collect your belongings from storage. After that, they're no longer my concern. You called me confused. I hope this letter clears that up. Love, Dad. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote their names on the front in ink that didn't shake. The plan was in motion. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without waking once. Thursday afternoon, I drove back to the house, the one I'd built, the one I no longer owned, the one that would by tomorrow belong to someone else entirely. I still had legal access. The paperwork hadn't closed yet, and Jason said the buyers wouldn't do their walkthrough until Friday morning. I had one last evening. That's all I needed. The neighborhood looked the same, but I didn't. I had changed. The man behind the wheel was no longer the Walter Pierce who waited by the phone for his daughter to call. I wasn't anyone's burden anymore. I parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way with the camera tucked in my jacket pocket and the letter sealed in a plain white envelope. Unlocking the front door with my old key, I stepped inside for the last time. The house smelled like lemon polish and spring air. Jason's crew had done their job. The furniture was gone, the shelves empty, the carpet vacuumed in perfect lines. But I still saw it all. Margaret in the kitchen humming as she stirred sauce. Emily barefoot in her prom dress, spinning in front of the mirror. Me standing on a ladder in the living room trying to hang a ceiling fan straight while Margaret laughed at my language. The silence now wasn't peaceful. It was surgical, as if the house itself had been scrubbed clean of our lives. I moved quickly. I plugged the camera into the front hallway outlet behind the small console table still left for staging. I angled it carefully, making sure the lens captured the entryway and the door. I opened the app on my phone and watched the live feed blink into focus. Perfect. Then I took the envelope from my jacket and taped it to the inside of the front door at eye level. They wouldn't miss it. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. I didn't feel triumphant. Not angry, just done. Done giving more than I received. Done being the man who was always available, always generous, always assumed to be too old or too tired to notice what was slipping away. Before leaving, I walked one final circuit of the house. In the kitchen, I touched the counter Margaret had chosen, remembering how she'd joked that the gold veins in the granite reminded her of sunlight trapped in stone. In the living room, I glanced at the space where the bay window once held her reading chair, a blanket always folded just so. In the hallway, I looked up at the wall where the family photo had hung for nearly 2 decades, now replaced by a bland canvas painting of sunflowers for the staging. I walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch. The garden beds were neat but bare. The daffodils we'd planted had come up again. They always did, no matter how cold the winter. I whispered one final thing to Margaret's memory. You were right. About all of it. Then I closed the door behind me, turned the lock, and left the keys on the kitchen counter. Back in my car, I opened the camera app and checked the feed again. The image was crisp, the door, the envelope, the afternoon sun slanting across the floor. All I had to do now was wait. Emily and Scott would be back tomorrow. And when they came through that door, or tried to, they'd learn exactly what happens when you mistake silence for surrender. Friday afternoon, at exactly 4:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the camera app without hesitation. The image blinked to life, the front entryway of the house I no longer called home. Sunlight pooled on the floor. Then a shadow moved across the threshold. Emily. Hair pulled back, suitcase in tow, high heels clicking on the walkway. Scott followed behind, sunglasses perched on his head, barking into his phone about liquidating options and restructuring proposals. Same tone he used at our dinner table when he was just between jobs. I watched from the screen of my phone in my new apartment, sitting on a thrift store recliner that didn't yet know the shape of my back. Emily reached for the doorknob with the ease of someone returning to a place they assumed was theirs. The key didn't turn. She tried again, then again, jiggling, forcing. Her brow furrowed. She stepped back, glanced at Scott. Did Dad change the lock? Scott's phone conversation halted mid-sentence. He walked over, took the key from her, tried it himself. The same result. No way, he muttered. He wouldn't even know how. He must have called someone. Emily said, her voice rising. Why would he? Then she saw it. The envelope taped to the inside of the glass. Her name written in my careful, deliberate script. She pressed her face to the window, squinting. Then slowly she turned the handle again, as if disbelief could force open what intent had already closed. It's locked, she whispered. Scott tried the back door, gone from frame for a few moments, then returned shaking his head. Garage is shut too, he said. No access. I'll call him, Emily said, pulling out her phone. But I'd already canceled my old number. It rang into nothing. She tried again and again, then threw the phone back into her purse, hands trembling. This doesn't make sense, she said. It makes perfect sense, Scott snapped. He found out. Emily's face crumbled. She pulled a bobby pin from her hair, a habit from childhood, when she was nervous, and stared at the note again. Scott reached into his bag and pulled out something, a small flathead screwdriver, I couldn't tell. He stepped out of frame, and I heard the faint clink of metal on metal. They were trying to break in. I leaned back in the chair and took a sip of cold coffee. The feed wobbled slightly as the camera caught the front door being jostled from the outside. Then a pause, and suddenly the door opened. Emily stepped in first, then froze. The house wasn't theirs. No bags in the hallway, no furniture, no smell of dinner waiting. Just emptiness and a white envelope fluttering from where she'd pulled it off the door. She opened it. The silence on the feed was deafening. Scott read over her shoulder. His face, always composed, performative, cracked. Jaw-tight nostrils flared. Emily's hands shook. She read the letter again and again. Then she sat down on the bare floor and began to cry. Not quietly. Scott paced behind her, muttering curses, running his hand through his hair like a man who just realized the poker hand he was bluffing had already been folded on. "He sold it," Emily finally said. "He sold the house?" "Yeah, no kidding. And he kept it all of it." Scott turned on her like a switchblade. "This is your fault. You said he trusted you. You said he was too soft to notice. You said we should do it," she yelled. "You said we couldn't wait any longer. You called him a burden. You said to strike while he still trusted us. I watched them unravel two people who thought they had the future in their grip, only to discover they'd never even held the pen." In the feed, Emily dropped her head into her hands. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a failure of a father. I felt like a man who had finally drawn the line. I closed the app. Not out of malice, not even satisfaction. Just closure. The image of my daughter crouched on the floor, tears streaking her cheeks that would stay with me longer than I cared to admit. I hadn't raised her to be that person, but I had somehow. And there was no undoing it now. I set the phone down on the nightstand beside Margaret's photo and whispered, "It's done." And I meant it. I didn't check the camera feed again. I deleted the app, then powered off the phone for the night. That Friday evening, I made myself a sandwich, poured a glass of cold milk, and ate in silence. Not the heavy silence of a house too full of memory, but a clean, uncluttered quiet. The kind that makes space for something new. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. Sunlight poured through the window above the sink in a wide stripe, landing on the laminate floor of my little kitchen. I stretched, cracked my knuckles, and pulled on a soft flannel shirt. It was still cool in the morning. Spring in Boise took its time. Downstairs, I walked the short block to Brews and Views, the coffee shop I'd passed every day since moving in but hadn't yet entered. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped in, and the smell of roasted beans and fresh cinnamon filled the air. The place was cozy, warm light brick walls, a chalkboard menu. A young woman behind the counter with purple streaks in her hair and a bright smile greeted me like she'd seen me before. "You're new," she said. "I never forget a face." "Walter," I said. "Just moved in down the street." "Welcome to the neighborhood, Walter. I'm Sarah." She glanced at my flannel. "Let me guess. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lucky guess," she grinned. "Retired engineers always order like that. My grandpa was one." I chuckled. "Close enough." She poured a tall cup and handed it over. "First one's on the house." I took a seat near the window, watching the quiet street wake up. Across the way, someone walked a dachshund in a tiny sweater. A couple strolled by holding hands. The local paper sat on the corner of the table, real ink, real pages. I felt the weight of everything I wasn't carrying anymore. No house, no debt, no guilt. Just me, a warm drink, in a town that didn't know my story and didn't need to. A few minutes later, a voice spoke beside me. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see a woman in her late 60s, gray hair pulled back neatly. A gentle way of standing, not tentative, but careful. Her eyes were kind. Familiar. "Joanne, the apartment manager." "Of course," I said. She sat across from me with a steaming mug and a blueberry scone. You look different today. Do I like